Hey guys, it's Abel here, back with another video. As you can see, back in my regular environment. And in this video, after some of the nerdy topics that I just covered in recent videos, I'm going to be addressing something that is a bit more fundamental in nature, and that is the question of how strong should you get? And I just noticed that I'm way too close to the camera. So I'm sure that you've seen some of the standards that are out there on the internet as to how strong should you be depending on how advanced you are as a trainee. And some of these standards are better than others. And in general, I think it's not a bad idea to have some idea as to what you should be striving for. But the first thing that I think is good to address here is that to some extent, the question of how strong I should be as an advanced lifter or an intermediate lifter is a little bit like asking how big I should be as an advanced lifter or intermediate lifter. I'm sure that you could conceive some sort of a guide which would tell you that, okay, if you're 5'11", so 180 centimeters, then you should be 75 kilos at 10% body fat as a beginner, and then 80 kilos at 10% body fat as an intermediate, and then 85 kilos at 10% body fat as an advanced lifter. And that wouldn't be a bad guide. I mean, it would be true for a lot of lifters. But at the same time, you can sort of feel intuitively that this will have a huge variance amongst individuals, because some people will just be naturally bigger boned. I mean, a guy who has a 7.5-inch wrist will probably have a naturally heavier body weight at a given body fat percentage and at a given training advancement than someone like I would have who has a wrist of 6.5 inches, I believe. So to some extent, the same thing applies for strength. I'm sure you've heard some of these stories about some crazy strong people who ended up being world-class powerlifters, like Andy Bolton. I believe the first time he went to the gym, he was squatting 400 pounds or like 180 kilos. So probably a guy like that will end up at a completely different place than someone who was pinned by really light weights in the beginning of their training career. Also, people just tend to get into the habit of doing some funky things when this idea gets into their head that, okay, size equals strength. For example, Jason Blaha, I've heard multiple times talk about this, that guys are afraid of getting under some heavy load and you need to get strong in order to get big. And this is a little bit backwards, and I talked about this multiple times on this channel, that yes, in a general sense, it is true that you will get stronger as you get bigger, but it's not the case that you need to get strong in order to get big. It is true that you will not see many guys that are weak and look super good. I mean, you can pick any guy who has an impressive physique. I don't care who it is. It can be natural or enhanced. If you look at the guy and he has an above average muscularity and you think that, damn, I would love to look like this guy, if you see any kind of vlog or workout footage of them, they will be moving some pretty impressive weights. Look at Mario Tomic, for example. He is not a power lifter. He is a fitness model and just a generally aesthetically looking guy. He bench presses well over 100 kilos for reps. He squats over 140 kilos for reps. He's a strong guy, even though he's not training for strength. And that is because as you're getting bigger, your muscles will naturally have a bigger force output and you will be stronger as a side effect. So this thing that you're hearing many times, that size is a side effect of strength, it's actually much more so the other way around. You will be stronger as a side effect of getting bigger. And this is just important to keep in mind because you can train in a lot of ways that will make you stronger, but it will not necessarily be the best way to get bigger. This is well illustrated by the fact that guys that are always training in lower rep ranges and with pretty low volume, they will often be pretty strong and they will often be deceptively strong. You would not think that this guy can bench press 120 kilos for 5 reps. And yeah, they're getting super strong because strength and getting stronger in lower rep ranges is basically a skill that you need to practice. And if you're always training in lower rep ranges, you will get very strong. Also, just to get back on what I was saying in the beginning, how strong people get have a pretty strong genetic interplay, just like their starting strength and how strong they are at the beginning of their training journey. And some of these things will be factors that kind of indirectly influencing your strength. For example, your connective tissue and joint strength. I mean, some people can just move super heavy weights with high volume. Their form might be even somewhat sloppy and they are just super resistant to injury. I mean, Kino Buddy is super strong. I mean, that guy was crazy strong even as a relatively novice lifter probably. And sometimes I'm just looking at his form on the overhead press and bench presses and I often see his wrist slacking backwards. I mean, if I did that with heavy weights that he is lifting, I mean, I would be out of the gym for 2 months instantly. My connective tissue is just genetically pretty prone to flare-ups and breaking down, basically. Børge Fagerli has talked about this multiple times, that he can get super strong on a couple of lifts, and at a certain point, his connective tissue integrity is what's limiting him from getting even stronger. I mean, I think he can do chin-ups with 60 additional kilos, and he could get even stronger, but his elbows just can't tolerate it. I also heard Menno Henselmans talk about this, and even I have experience with this with certain lifts, that I could keep getting stronger, but I can feel that my elbow or my knee is just going to get in the way of getting even better. Now, with all these caveats, I would also say that focusing on getting stronger and increasing the weight on the bar is still the best that you have. Simply because even if you're only focused on getting as big and muscular as possible, tracking your muscle growth is basically impossible. I mean, even as a novice lifter, if you can gain 15 to 20 pounds of muscle in a year, month to month, and especially week to week, it's pretty much impossible to track that. On the other hand, you can track your strength progression really well. So setting goals in terms of strength and focusing on your progression in the gym is still the best that you can do. And there are some pretty good guides out there. EXRX is a website which has pretty good strength standards. I will link that down below. Also a website called strengthlevel.com, I believe. It has a lot of strength standards for a lot of lifts, not just the big three, so not just bench, overhead press, deadlift, squat, but they also have strength standards for machine exercises and dumbbell movements. And those are pretty good to shoot for. But what I would say is the best way to set goals for yourself is whatever your strength level is at the moment, you should be a hell of a lot stronger than that in a couple of months. And this really applies to all exercises, whether it's a machine chest press or a leg extension or a calf raise in the seated calf raise machine or on the leg press. If you can add 10 to 20% strength to whatever level you're at the moment, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to get bigger. And one sort of modifier I would add to that is that your strength increases on a given exercise are really starting to quote unquote count once you've been doing that for a couple of weeks at least. And it's not necessarily because in the beginning you're only getting neural adaptations and they don't count towards muscle growth. Not because of that, but mainly because when you're doing a new exercise, for the first few weeks, you're really kind of only learning how to grind on that exercise better. So when you're getting on to a new leg press machine, for example, sure, a leg press is not a super technical exercise. I mean, you don't need to gain as much experience with it as you would need, for example, with a squat. But still, you still need to figure out for yourself which foot placement is the most comfortable for you, how to adjust the back pads for your back. You might be still adjusting these throughout the set itself, but after a couple of weeks, you're really getting into the groove of it. And after 4 weeks, you can really exert yourself maximally on that leg press. The same thing can apply for a Smith machine bench press, for example. It's not nearly as difficult technically as a normal free weight barbell bench press, but still you kind of need to get into the groove of it because initially you're getting under it. You need to figure out where to set the bench so that the bar gets down to the proper position on your chest. You also need to figure out how to unreg the bar so that it doesn't hurt your wrist. And after a couple of weeks, you're really getting into it, and then you can only focus on maximal performance. And then, of course, this gets much more exacerbated with free weight movements or dumbbell movements, which can be much more technical in nature. So I guess that's the main reason against program hopping. But the long story short is, yes, it is good to set strength goals and performance goals and to keep your eyes on the prize. It is good to look for other people to see what they are doing and try to emulate that because that can be a good motivator. But in general, whatever your strength level is right now on whatever exercises you do, aim to get as strong on them as possible. If you're doing leg extensions now with 40 kilos for 10 reps, if in a couple of months you can do that with 50 kilos for 10 reps, your legs are going to get bigger. The strength and muscle increases will not be one-to-one, definitely not in fact. But one thing you can be sure of is that if you're still doing that same weight and rep number on that leg extension machine, your quads are most probably not going to get any bigger. And now that I mentioned this, a good thing to bring up, and probably some of you have heard this before, James Clear made this statement a few months ago, and just logically thinking about it, it makes total sense that isolation, single joint movements can often actually be a better way of tracking your progress than free weight, very technical barbell movements. Because if your 15 RM increases on a leg extension, basically there is no real other way of getting much better at that movement than your quads getting bigger. On the other hand, if your squat increases a lot, that can have a lot to do with technical improvements and your nervous system getting more efficient, or actually some other muscle group which you might not be caring about as much getting better. Like in the case of the squat, your glutes or your lower back might be getting stronger, whereas your quads, not as much as you would think. But in the case of the leg extension, either your quads are getting much stronger and bigger, or there is no real other way of getting better at the leg extension. So yeah, that would be my short rant on how strong you should get. If you want to revisit a couple of points, then check the timestamps in the video description. Otherwise, I hope you liked this video and found it interesting and useful. And if you did, drop a like or drop a dislike. If you didn't like it, troll me, I'll troll you back. I guess I shouldn't even say it, it's getting a bit repetitive. But anyway, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and otherwise, have a great day. See you next time.